What I'd say is the price needs to be somewhere between the table and the ceiling being the maximum that a client is willing to pay. Your goal is to reach as high as possible. Once you know those numbers, then you can have that conversation with your team and those who are pricing and however that's structured, and just be very clear on what the underlying math really looks like.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. Today we have one of our longtime friends, Albert Banks, on the show. So, quick story about Albert before we get into the podcast. I was at my first soda
Wait,
event.
you said you were going to do any pre-showing, Jamie.
This isn't pre-showing. This is just an intro. I have to tell the story because it's a good one about Albert.
Okay, go ahead.
So, yeah. So, first soda event I was at a bar, and for some reason Jody wasn't there and Adam wasn't there. I think we had maybe different events we went to, and I walk into the bar, and the first face I see is Albert, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to this guy. He has a friendly face, and we started talking for like 15 minutes, getting to know each other. He's like, oh, by the way, I'm a client. I'm like, oh, you are? I had no clue that Albert was one of our clients. I think it was because he was only on the tax side, but since that moment, I always found Albert at all of our soda events. We had some long conversations and lunches together. So really, someone that I respect and excited to kind of hear his perspective on some stuff today. So, Albert, why don't you tell us a little bit about your path to where you are today and kind of what you're working on now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I had fun time working with Dave for many years on your side. So appreciate the shout out there. He's been great, and obviously got to know you and Jody through soda. So it's been very valuable partners to us that are trying to manage our businesses when we have no idea what we're doing. So speaking of, I started my agency right out of college. 20 plus years ago, I was a developer, so I started kind of on the technical side, and my partner was more creative. So kind of rode that initial wave of web design and development through Flash, and then kind of worked my way out of doing client work, into really focusing on running the business. And so I got my MBA on the fly, and been doing sort of everything, sort of back office, I guess you'd call it, anything non-billable that's not sales. So finance, operations, IT, legal, insurance, resourcing, things like that. So really got to know how to run the business while also being a part of the leadership team. So we merged in with a local competitor. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So this was about eight years ago, and that really was a great opportunity for us to grow and to scale, mitigate some client risk, and me to personally focus on, again, that sort of operational side of the business. We went to market and sold that agency about 3 years ago now to a global company. And so I continue to run the Charlotte office as well as lead the integration, which was pretty intense. And then for the past year or so, I've been consulting full time with other businesses, really using sort of the experiences I've had and going through transactions and growing from the various sort of thresholds of business size. And yeah, it's been a great time. And so I'm happy to share advice. I've entered that stage of my life where I want to give back and share and help those that are maybe going through tough challenges.
Yeah, you can always tell when someone knows their stuff when you're at a big event, and anytime Albert's in the room, people are kind of like gathering around him, asking questions because of the success he's had with his business, and now that what he's doing with consulting. So very excited for today's conversation. So today we're going to talk about how to make margins prior to the sale. So very excited to kind of hear some tips here that you can do in the sales process and before the project even starts, setting yourself up for success. So do you want to kind of introduce that topic real quick, and then Jody and I will follow up with a ton of questions.
Absolutely. There's always things that can go wrong during an engagement, during a project, right? There's things that happen that you need to handle. But I wanted to take the opportunity to just address sort of preventative medicine, things that can be taken care of and looked at and handled a certain way before you ever start the project to set yourself up for success. And so kind of divvied that up into sort of 5 areas. The first is really about the underlying math. So making sure you know what you're charging and you're sort of built for margin. You're bringing yourself to the table as an expert so that you can have a good starting relationship and show your value. Sort of mitigate the risk by finding unknown unknowns. And then a little bit about how you price, using anchoring and options, and then some tips around how you might negotiate the sale so you're set up for success.
Have you found that with AI becoming even more and more popular, basically it's condensing our basically helping out operations a ton, where we're actually getting things done quicker and faster, that the hourly bill is kind of going by the wayside, and more of a value-based bill is becoming more and more
Absolutely, yeah,
prevalent.
for
Is
sure.
that what you're saying?
I'd recommend people move from time and materials, if you haven't, to more fixed based or retainer based. That's for sure. Um, and but you've got to understand your underlying cost, because ultimately we're in the service business, right? So you have an hourly
Mm-hmm.
cost for every team member. So you've really got to start there. But yes, for sure, pricing needs to be decoupled. I always say decouple price from cost, but you need to know cost, and that's sort of how I think about it. I have this concept of kind of floor, table, and ceiling. So your floor is really, based on the minimum you would need to charge to break even, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's looking at each person, whether it be their salary in particular or their role, adding an overhead, non-billable time. A lot of people call that fully loaded cost, right? You can use that either individually by role. You can have an agency blended rate, which is what we did for a long time. And then you'll use that rate and multiply it times the relevant hours. And again, that's the floor. Then what I call is the table. So this is for you to make margin, and whatever that desired
Mm-hmm.
margin is, if that's 10, 15, 20, 50%, I don't know, based on your setup and your goals, that's really table stakes. So you need to be charging at least that to hit your margin. And so what I'd say is the price needs to be somewhere between the table and the ceiling. Ceiling being the maximum, right, that a client is willing to pay, and your goal is to reach as high as possible above that. And in practice, what that looks like is, like, let's say you calculate your cost rate at 135, maybe your table
Mm-hmm.
a little over 20% is maybe 165. If you charge anything less than that 165, you're cutting into your own profit, right? So you're already setting up yourself for failure. And then certainly if it's below that 135 mark, I mean, you're effectively subsidizing your client's budget, right? So it's not a good place to be. And so those are very clear conversations. Once you know those numbers, then you can have that conversation with your team and those who are pricing, and however that's structured, whether that's your PMs, account folks, new biz folks, and just be very clear on what the underlying math really looks like. And of course, that gets you to a starting point, right? You can have your effective bill rate, which is the reality of what happens based on the actual hours rather than the estimated. But we can sort of get into that
Yep.
later.
I'm curious on the understanding understanding your ceiling and table and floor. So how much, we had a conversation about this yesterday, actually, with a couple of
Mm-hmm.
partners I was talking with, but how much does external factors affect which of those you're willing to take? Like, if sales are really good right now, okay, we're only willing to take the ceiling, or,
Mhm.
this is a client or an industry we really want to get into, we might be willing to go down to the floor. So how much do those factors dictate what you're willing to take?
Yeah, this is all great in a bubble, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
theory, but in practice, I think again, you start with the floor. So it's what we did is annually, I would do this calculation of what we expect our cost to be the next year, right? So factoring in, like, what are we doing for raises? Where's the market going? What is our health insurance cost maybe going to look like? So planning ahead and developing that floor in advance, and then we would even start charging that. We do this calculation on Q3. We start charging it in Q4, like knowing our renewals going into the next year. So we're basically preparing for the increased expenses. So certainly we're looking at external factors when calculating that. And then, yeah, margin. I think you personally, I believe you should just fundamentally decide what is my target margin for my business, and you're working based on that. So if you take anything less than your table, then that has to be a strategic conversation, right? And what is the reason for that? Is that, hey, we don't have enough work, so we might as well take something and at least break even or dip into our margin a little bit, and that's totally a viable path, especially in tough times.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be, yeah, this is a great client. Maybe this first engagement, we're not going to get a lot of margin, but we see a path to one that is really great. Or it's a great logo, or we're trying to enter this market, or whatever it may be. And this is a vertical we want to just have a case study in. So there's all kinds of factors why you might kind of find your way dipping below that ceiling, but again, ideally not below that table. Yeah.
How do you go about finding out what that table is? So you said, taking into consideration, are you looking at your gross profit at the top? Or are you going all the way down to the bottom line and saying, hey, here's what my bottom line needs to be. I need to get that 15-20% bottom line, and then backing into it.
Yeah, it's all cost, right? Yeah. So certainly you need the cost of goods, right? So all the team members working on their work, and that includes benefits, salary, and then adding in overhead, adding in new business, adding in non-billable folks, so that you ultimately know at the end of the day, what does it cost us to run the agency in whole. And then yes, you want to make a margin on top of that. So it's including everything. We also looked at sort of gross margin as well as even gross
Mhm.
project margin. So it's certainly a
Mhm.
metric you can use. But all I'm saying is when you're looking at pricing, you've got to account for all the costs that are involved across all your team members.
So are you assuming you're going to have X amount in revenue then in order to do that? Hey, we're going to have $5 million in revenue, and then backing into it, and then how many projects do we need to actually have within that? And then you're going after those projects at with those margins. Is that how I'm understanding how you're looking at it?
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, you have to have an expectation of utilization, right? Like for our agency to work, that's based on the time that they're also dedicated to not be billable, right? So if you're targeting, let's say, a certain group that's 80% utilized, for example, when we shifted and removed or split our account and project management roles, our account managers we knew would be 40% billable, right? So we had to take that into account that, hey, we're paying for a lot more non-billable time, therefore we're going to need that additional revenue or margin in our pricing to sort of afford the type of business that we want to run and still make a 20% margin.
So it sounds like even though you're not billing by the hour, you're billing more on a flat fee or value base.
Mm-hmm.
You're still tracking time because you need to know what that bottom line truly is and how to actually price it going forward, whether you're pricing it too low or too high. Does that sound pretty reasonable?
That's right. I know everybody hates time tracking. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I was a non-billable team member for a number of years, and I still clock my time. So
Mm-hmm.
I get it, but that information is very, very powerful. It allows us to know where we stand, to make corrective action if we're measuring it in a reasonable time frame. So yes, it's I'm not a big fan of like sharing that with clients. I think that's really an internal
Mm-hmm. Yep.
data point that you use, but it's certainly
Mm-hmm.
valuable, and there needs to be rationale behind why people do that. And we were big on communicating with our team what that means and why we need them to clock time. We went so far as to have conversations with them about our target margin and how they could impact that and why it was important. And we shared that with them. We had profit sharing. So we just created a culture where it was understood that that was important and explained why.
Perfect.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to what we do, Jamie. Would you
Definitely.
agree?
Yeah, no, I
Mm-hmm.
definitely agree, and I think especially as you kind of get into these next steps, it's like I feel very comfortable going into a sales call at Anders because I know what our pricing is going to be, and I know
Mm-hmm.
that I'm going to if I hit the right buttons, the pricing is going to be right. And so what my job on the sales call is kind of your next point is it's to show that expertise and it's to show that I can diagnose and really understand what they're looking for and hopefully match it correctly. So you want to talk a little bit about how that part of the process works?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say I'll credit Blair Enns with a lot of my mentality here. Yeah,
Great guy.
yeah. Yeah, it's the expert mindset, right? Like under coming to the table with you're not really a vendor taking orders, but you're the expert. You're being hired to help in an area where you are the knowledge guru, right? So here the big point I would make, and this worked really well for us when we made this pivot was really never pricing or bidding on what he calls like the big build and doing it sort of blind, like, hey, here's this, we're going to build this massive website or we're going to roll out this massive campaign or whatever it is. We shifted to selling a discovery and strategy phase first. And there's a couple benefits to this. One, it's fixed fee, is generally repeatable. Like you're kind of doing the same work every time you do it, so you're already sort of protecting yourself on the margin there. But the most important, I think, in the sales process is you're helping set yourself up as a valuable expert, right? And you're diagnosing with what the prescription might be, rather than sort of jumping straight to some sort of solution. So you're asking the tough questions about why and what, and then you can get through that diagnostic. There's little risk for exceeding your estimated hours because you kind of know what it takes, or you scale that discovery based on the number of interviews or research you're doing or whatever it may be. So you're kind of in a safe spot, and the end result is more scoping accuracy for the ultimate bigger project. And you've got the client aligned and then riding shotgun with you as you go through that, and there's less argument about what's in scope, out of scope, what should we include, what do the phases look like. They've been involved in that process sort of early on. So playing the expert and doing that diagnostic and then prescription with the client really sets you up for success on margin.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, you could probably teach this to accounting firms because this is exactly what we do. I
Yeah.
mean, we identified long ago using data is crucial. I mean, you got to have the data, and you got to know how long it takes you to get things done, who's on the account, and all that kind of good stuff. And then once you do that, you'll know what it's going to cost to do X project or Y
Mhm.
project. For the most part, you're going to be right 75% of the time. 25% you're going to be wrong, but that's cool as long as over all your projects you're hitting that the bottom line that you need to hit or the margin you need to hit, and then it becomes super easy. Then once you know that information and you have that information, you can give that to anybody in your team and they can quote the exact same way, and that's what makes it so valuable, right? And so, like Jamie had mentioned, he can quote the exact same dollar amount that I would quote. I would quote the exact same dollar amount that Adam would quote. We'd all quote it. We can give it to our CFOs. They would quote the exact same dollar amount because everything is already defined and prescribed there, for the client. So it's not typically what we call a flat fee where it's the exact same dollar amount for every type of client,
Mhm.
but it scales based on maybe size of the client or difficulty of the client. There's a lot of different ways you can scale it to truly create a value base versus a flat base. Because one thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to tell everybody, yeah, create this great thing, and then, hey, I just sold $1 million job, and you never had $1 million job before, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, that's why I got it
Yeah.
because I priced it way too low,
Mhm.
and now I'm going to get killed. So you have to be real careful with that. How do you identify the difficulty levels when you're doing your pricing there? If you see a prospect there, how do you identify? Oh, that prospect, that's going to be this pricing structure versus maybe an easier prospect without actually having worked with that prospect before.
Yeah, that kind of brings us to the next topic, which is black swan. So this is from Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss. So it's more about negotiation, but I think it's one of the biggest things, and Blair kind of touches on it in his 4 conversations. Is you really have to understand, you really have to dive in with that prospect or even current client to discover what they call the unknown unknowns, right? You probably already know the things that are sort of the lookouts, but there's definitely going to be things that'll completely derail you if you don't discover them. So that's really your job, and so you start with the assumption, right? Like the assumption is that you think you know the full picture, right? So, oh, I've seen this before. I've seen this type of project. It fits in this box, and that can be a big mistake if you don't go through it. So you almost have to start with, hey, I know there's at least, let's say, 3 things that I need to learn that I don't know, and I don't even know how to ask for it right now. That could blow this up, and so my job is to go on that hunt, and discover it. And so there's a couple of different areas where you can do that. It's discovering sort of their why, like why are they doing this project,
Yep.
and asking it in a way like why do you need this to work, why do you need this feature, what happens if this fails, right? And a lot of times you'll get you'll uncover other things that they didn't reveal initially, right? That could change how you approach that. Like, hey, I'm going to lose my job, or my boss is going to lose their job. It's got to launch by this date for this event, right? So suddenly it isn't about like features or anything. It's really about the timeline. And so now you have that knowledge, and you can adjust how you're sort of proceeding with the scope. So, and maybe you can charge a premium, like, oh my gosh, that's going to be a rush timeline, and so we're going to have to move resources off one thing to another, and that changes things versus finding that out later. And
Yeah, this is really a change that we've made recently because we've heard agencies doing this, and agencies have been doing this for a very long time. They have the discovery process, whether it's a paid discovery or whatever. And so this is something that we kind of struggled with in the finance world, kind of to match to our pricing. Is like we want to get our pricing out right away. So what we do now is at the end of sales calls, we say this is your pricing, but we're going to go through a 2-week discovery process where we're going to just make sure that everything we talked about in this call is accurate. And oftentimes it lowers your price. And so we make sure we say that, because if we go in and we have accounts payable classified as high, and then we go and actually look at it, oh, well, this AP is actually really easy, we will lower it to medium or low. And so I think that's something that we've talked about at the end of our sales calls is this is the price right now, but we want to make sure that you guys know that it might change if we as we find out a little bit more, because there's kind of like you said, we have this bank buildup of things that we know are going to take longer or be harder for us to do. Like if their incoming controller is leaving and we're replacing them, that might be a little bit more work for us. If their books are a mess, like if the prior books we're working on are just a disaster and haven't been touched in 8 months, then that's gonna be a lot more work for us and have to increase the cost. And so that's something we're outlining at the end of our sales process. Is this is your price today, but in 2 weeks we'll give you an updated price based on what we've talked about. And so I think that's something that we think we've figured out how to do that discovery process similar to the agency world. So you want to talk a little bit about that discovery process that you recommend?
Yeah, I think it's asking great questions. I mean, whether you do this sort of in the discovery process and it's sort of paid or not, like these are questions you have to find the answer to, right? Like there's hidden constraints, like you mentioned some of them. There could be technical debt, there could be politics, there could be budget caps, right? So you have to ask these questions in a way. And so, Chris Voss mentions this is sort of no concept, right? Like asking questions like are there any internal approvals we should know about, and so it's like it's not a like it's an open, these are open-ended questions. We don't want to ask it sort of like that. It's more like, hey, it seems like you have the autonomy to approve this without checking with IT and legal. Oh, we'll say, oh, no, we've got to check with them. Oh, well, now all of a sudden you discovered something that they weren't willing to share in the first place. And then there's like the ghost in the room, right? Like Blair Brick calls this like the decision maker. Who is the decision maker? So you've got to ask this, like, what does your board think of the timeline? What does the leadership think of this timeline? Or like, oh, well, everyone's on board. Well, is there someone that would be surprised by this direction? So, oh yeah, actually, we've got to show the founder. Oh, okay. Well, then, yeah, we don't have all the decision makers in the room. So, and oh, by the way, the founder thinks we should do this in house. Oh, okay. Well, now maybe we need to scope like a proof of concept. Like that we're up against a totally different challenge than we thought of when we kind of went into this. So, yeah, a lot of it is about how you ask the questions and digging deeper. And yeah, ideally, it's in a discovery, but you could also do this in some of the calls and conversations you have before you ever even and sort of get to that point. And sometimes these black swans can be positive, sometimes they can be negative, sometimes they can be wild. Just never know.
Yeah. Cool. So let's go down to the next couple of things you mentioned. I want to make sure we get through both of them. So you kind of have maximizing price and the negotiation approach. So if you want to kind of summarize those real quick, and then Jody and I will probably have a couple of follow-up questions on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Maximizing price, again, decoupling it from cost, right? So getting whoever is pricing to have that sort of mentality is sort of the sky's the limit, or really, I guess, the ceiling, right? So you start with anchoring high, right? You don't want to negotiate with yourself. You don't want to assume that, oh, I'm going to miss out by throwing out a number or putting something out there that's going to get me disqualified. If that's the case, maybe you weren't the right partner, to begin with. And frankly, it sets kind of a framework for your value. So going in and anchoring high, and providing options. If you come in with a binary, hey, here's the price, you can very easily get a no. But if you come in with options, a no is much harder. So start with the first option, which is sort of your safety net. It's your low risk yes, right? It meets the basic requirements. It's not a throwaway. It's not like a sacrificial lamb. Some people do that. But it's really the sort of minimum to meet the expectations of the engagement. Then the second option, everybody always picks the middle, right? That's what you want. That's the core option, what you believe they really should buy. And not only should it meet the demands, but there's probably some value add there that should increase the likelihood of success. And this one really should be based on value, right? So you're truly providing something additional and hopefully receiving some sort of premium. And then the highest being the anchor, right? So this is the high value one. This is the sort of all in. Maybe it's accelerated timelines. Maybe you're bringing coaching. Maybe they require exclusivity. Whatever it may be, there's this sort of the next level. And this one could be like 1.5 to 3 times the price of option 2. So it's again truly anchoring high and say, hey, if we were to really blow out this, if we were to do this the way we would really want to, here's where you are. So ultimately, price number 2 doesn't look so bad. And what we often found was, there'd be somewhere in between 2 and 3. Like it's rare that someone would buy off on 3, and if they did, great, that's awesome. But more likely, you start saying, hey, I like this element of 3. What if we added that to 2, right? Mm-hmm. And so you end up somewhere sort of in between. But again, you don't get a no. So anchoring high and providing options.
And it sounds like you're doing all this with the client right there, correct? I mean, everything is with the client. The client's participating in this. They're helping create they're basically helping create the price. So it's not something you're just like getting all the information, then coming back and throwing them an email with all the, here's all the different options. Am I right there?
I think it's a combination. Like you certainly want to gather these things, and the deeper you go with some of those questions we talked about earlier, the more likely option 2 or 3 are going to make sense to them. Like, oh yeah, I remember when we talked about that thing. I remember when I shared this other challenge that wasn't in this RFP or whatever it may be. So yes, but then it's also some hard work on your team to really think about their problem and offer greater solutions and go above and beyond sort of what they're asking for. So it's sort of a combination of what you've learned from the client as well as how far your team can push it. And again, you're showing your expertise, right? You're showing that you understand their problem, you're understanding their business, and so these solutions are very much valid.
Yeah, no, I definitely think with the type of product that the agency world is providing, like having a couple of sales calls to gather information and come in with the right approach is really important. So I think that is definitely an important aspect. So when you get to that negotiation, like what type of questions are you asking? How are you closing the deal? That's always for me the tough one. Once I have the option out there, I have the SFW, and like how many times should I email this guy, or what should I set a follow up call? Like that's always the tough part for me. So wow, how do you close this deal?
Yeah, I've got a couple of pieces of advice, but maybe the biggest one is like be prepared to walk away, right? Like if this is not a good deal for you and your business, all things being equal, you be ready to walk away, right? So you are the expert, you're the prize, so be willing to walk away. But it's specifically for the negotiation, it's triggering those no kind of things like, hey, is it ridiculous to expect this level of quality for this price? Oh well, no, yeah, that I get it. It kind of makes sense, right? So you're making sure you're framing questions in the right way, where they're sort of lowering their guard when they respond to things like that. Asking these sort of calibrated questions, right? Like, hey, they come to us with, hey, our budget's really this. Like, I know you quoted this number, say 20K, but we really have 10. Okay, I understand your constraints. So how am I supposed to do that? Right? Like you're the expert. You've said it's 20K. If they have 10K, put it back on them. Okay, how do we get to 10K? So either they'll realize and potentially admit that, yeah, that's unreasonable to ask for the same thing for half the price. Mm-hmm. Or they're like, oh, well, what if we cut this, right? So now you start getting into scoping and changing that. Or, yeah, you're right. Let me go back to my CFO and see if we can get closer to that 20, right? So you're sort of putting them in the seat of finding solutions based on the constraint that they brought to the table, not you. And then sort of labeling, right? Like, describing how they look at that. Hey, wow, this price is way higher than I expected. Okay, yeah, I get it. You're seeing sticker shock, right? Like, you're probably worried that's not gonna justify the investment, right? And so you're helping like tie to their emotions and dive in there, and that can often get them to sort of explain themselves. And maybe they'll reveal, okay, well, here's the specific ROI we need to hit. Great, let's work through that and figure out that. And then sometimes you're just expensive. Like maybe you're the top end of the market, and you can come out the gate and just say that, right? Look, hey, before I share my proposal, you're going to think we're expensive, right? You may even think we're overpriced. You're going to wonder why, and we'll explain all of that to you. So you're basically already getting them to feel the emotion that you're probably going to get anyway, but you're approaching it in a way where you're like, hey, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid. And then when they actually see the price, because they've overblown it in their heads already, oh, well, yeah, okay, it's high, but it wasn't as high as I was imagining. So you're kind of disarmed them. So
it's exactly what we do. We always talk about, hey, I don't, it's going to be expensive. We know what you're looking for. It's going to be expensive. And then as we're going through it, we always start with the high price, and then we whittle down to what they do. And like what you had said, we don't discount anything, but we allow them to take things off the table. Hey, instead of us doing, whatever, we're going to do this instead, and then you're working with the client. And afterwards, the client really never asks you for discounts at that point, because they've actually worked with you together to come up with that price. And that's the win-win for both of us, right? For the client and for us, because we're not giving them a product that they're not going to utilize, or they could get cheaper doing it maybe in-house or whatever. And then we're not going to, on our end, lose the margins that we need in order to grow and feed our people, that type of thing.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of the first lessons Jody told me. We went to Seattle together when I first started working at Summit back in the day. Is like, don't be afraid to tell people we're top shelf. Like we are not the cheapest option when it comes to the accounting world. I'm like, really? You want me to tell them that? He's like, yeah, go ahead. Like the number they're putting in their head will be a lot bigger once you say that. So that was one of the first lessons I learned on the
Mhm.
sales side, and it's worked for me ever since. But yeah, no, great conversation. I know you're an expert in a lot of areas, and so I appreciate you bringing this framework for us. But I want to wrap up with a fun question. So luckily the three of us, we're all part of Soda, which chooses some really cool travel locations. So
Mhm.
let's, instead of whenever you go somewhere, people always say, oh, that's a really cool foodie town. And so I am curious, what is your guys' favorite place that you've been where you think the food's the best? And so, Jody, I'm going to start with you on this one because I know you travel a lot, and I'm sure you have some ideas in mind of where you think you can get the best food.
The food's the best. Well, I would go. I love fish, so any kind of Caribbean island, obviously it matches my decor a little bit, and it is where I would go. We just recently went to Carousel, and the food there was awesome. Loved it. Fresh fish, fresh, octopus, whatever you really want. It really, to me, it was really great. Now, unfortunately, my wife likes nothing like that. so,
Steak.
so it's really difficult
Yeah,
when I go to some place I really like for her to find something that she really likes. So that's always the curveball that I've got.
very picky wife.
Her fish is fish fillet from McDonald's or fillet of fish, whatever it's called. That's her fish. And I'd say the Caribbean islands, any one of those would be great. And living in Fort Lauderdale, it's really easy for me to hop into and maybe take an hour flight over to Jamaica or whatever. And that's the cool part about living anywhere remote.
Nice. All right, Albert, what about you?
Yeah, similar to Judy, I think the question is answered differently if you're on your own or with your family.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I'm on my own, I almost have two ends of the spectrum. So one is like I've really adopted sort of the Mediterranean diet, and so I've loved
Ooh,
when we've been in Europe
me too.
and in Greece, Spain, Lisbon. Like when you're on the coast, there's some really great food, fresh, lots of vegetables, lots of fish, and so that's really like kind of my personal favorite. But we were actually just in New Orleans for the GMM, and
Yes, you are.
Cajun food, it's not the healthiest, but man, it is always delicious and unique. And yeah, some of the best food I've had has been in New Orleans. So I have to add that kind of to a major foodie city.
Definitely. Great. Yeah,
KJ, how about you?
I agree on the international front with Greece. That to me, I love
Mhm.
Mediterranean food. I love Greek food. When we were in Athens, like that was like paradise for me. Like I could eat 7 meals a day. I love a Greek salad. I love garbons. I love everything Mediterranean. So yeah, that was definitely internationally. Now for the U.S., I think an underrated foodie town for me is Albuquerque, New Mexico. Like I love the food in
Oh,
New Mexico. Like I love green chili. I love
Mhm.
Mexican food. Like whenever we go down there, that's some of the best meals I've had in my life. And sometimes I just think about some of those meals I've had. I'm like, man, I wish I could go there again. It's so
is
good.
it
So
the heat?
that's
Is it the heat part of it, or is it the
yeah.
the?
They a lot of times it's just really
Mhm.
simple, where it's just like a bowl of green chili, and with like
Mhm.
warm tortillas, and just like it's just so good to me. It's like I
Mhm.
could eat there all the time. And there's just so much variety and like tamales and just yeah, all the food down there I just love. So that's kind of my
Mhm.
underrated foodie city in America. So
Yeah, Albert, this has been a great talk. This is probably one of my favorite conversations. I love pricing. I love the psychology of it. I like how it delivers with clients, and I like it when the client comes out as the winner as well as the person selling the product. Then it's not a sale; it's more of a hey, let's come to a mutual agreement and come up with what's best for both of us. And I think that's what you're professing. With what you're doing there. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your new occupation here, your new business, and how that's going before we wrap things up?
Yeah, it's great. Honestly, I love helping people. I love problem solving. I found myself at various ends of the spectrum, right? Like helping folks that just really need to get their finance processes and systems and charts in order, and at a smaller company, and then companies that are going through multiple acquisitions and need to figure out how to integrate them. So all kinds of different challenges at different stages. So that's really been exciting for me. A lot of it has focused on sort of finance and process and operations and how to bring things together. But I've really enjoyed it, and now that I've been through multiple acquisitions and integrations, I can bring even the empathy to the situation, right? Which it's a really challenging event for a founder or owner to go through. And it's something they've never done before. And it's emotional. So I'm also find myself, in addition to consulting, being a little bit of a coach or a listening ear, which is great because I'm happy to share and help.
Sounds great. How would we get a hold of you?
Yeah, certainly check out the website apprentice.co or email me at albert.banks@apprentice.co. Yeah, love to chat. There's no pressure. I'm not a salesperson. I'm honestly about there to help. So if it's just making a connection and hearing how things are going, I love that. And I've also got partners, so if I can't help you, there's certainly somebody I can introduce you to, like Anders, that specialize in certain things, because I'm pretty focused in the areas that I help as well.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, yeah, great conversation, and really appreciate you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone.